I walked into my parents' dining room wearing my best navy suit, expecting to celebrate their 30th wedding anniversary with dignity. Instead, my mother, Margaret, pointed toward a small folding table in the corner, complete with cartoon placemats and plastic cups. "Since you're still single at 32, you belong at the kids' table with Tommy," she announced cheerfully. My married siblings, David and Sarah, settled into chairs at the elegant mahogany table with their spouses discussing mortgage rates and vacation destinations. I stared at the tiny plastic chair, feeling my chest tighten with complete humiliation. Standing beside that ridiculous folding table, I felt like I was 8 years old again. My nephew Tommy looked up at me with confused eyes, probably wondering why his 32-year-old uncle was being treated like a child. The contrast between our seating arrangements couldn't have been more obvious. The adult table featured fine china crystal glasses and flickering candles, while Tommy and I got paper plates decorated with superheroes and sippy cups. Let me explain something about my family dynamics. I'm Paul Anderson, and I work as a software consultant from home. My family has never understood what I do for a living, and they've made their disapproval crystal clear over the years. They see my unmarried status and remote work situation as evidence that I'm somehow failing at life. My older brother David manages a regional bank branch. He's 35, married to Jessica, and they have 2 children. David drives a sensible sedan, owns a house in the suburbs, and follows every conventional milestone perfectly. My parents treat him like their golden child, constantly praising his stability and responsibility. My younger sister Sarah teaches 3rd grade at the local elementary school. She's 29, married to Brian, who works in construction, and they have 1 daughter. Sarah and Brian are saving for a bigger house, and my parents frequently mention how proud they are of her traditional family structure. Then there's me. I built a successful consulting business working with technology companies, but since I work remotely and live alone, my parents assume I'm unsuccessful. They've never asked about my income, my clients, or my professional achievements. In their minds, unmarried equals unsuccessful. As I reluctantly took my seat at the kids' table, my mother began serving appetizers. She placed elegant shrimp cocktail and stuffed mushrooms at the adult table, while Tommy and I received chicken nuggets and apple slices. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. "Paul, honey, maybe this year you'll finally meet someone special," Margaret said, while pouring wine for the adults. "David and Sarah both found wonderful partners by your age. It's really time you started thinking about settling down." My father, Robert, raised his glass toward the adult table. "Let's toast to real family stability," he announced, completely ignoring Tommy and me. "To those who've taken on adult responsibilities and built meaningful lives." The adults clinked their crystal glasses while I held a plastic cup filled with apple juice. Tommy whispered, "Uncle Paul, why can't you sit with the grown-ups? You seem pretty grown up to me." His innocent question cut deeper than any deliberate insult could have. I ruffled his hair and tried to smile. "Sometimes adults make decisions that don't make much sense, buddy." David launched into a detailed explanation of his recent promotion to senior loan officer. He described his new corner office, increased salary, and additional responsibilities with obvious pride. Jessica added details about their latest home improvements and their plans to refinance their mortgage at better rates. Sarah followed with news about her students' test scores and her nomination for Teacher of the Year. Brian discussed his construction company's expansion and their hopes of buying a larger house before their daughter started kindergarten. Everyone listened with genuine interest and offered enthusiastic congratulations. When conversation briefly turned toward me, I mentioned landing a major consulting contract with a Fortune 500 company. The response was polite but dismissive. "That's nice, dear," Margaret said while refilling David's wine glass. "Maybe someday you'll find a real job with benefits and security." "Consulting work is so unstable," Robert added. "You never know when clients might disappear. It's not like having a steady paycheck and retirement plan." David nodded sympathetically. "If you ever want to discuss financial planning or investment strategies, let me know." The bank offers excellent services for people trying to build stability. Their concern felt condescending rather than supportive. They spoke about my career the same way they might discuss a teenager's part-time job, as if it were temporary and unimportant. As the evening progressed, conversations at the adult table became increasingly animated. They discussed politics, local news, and shared memories that somehow never included me. When I attempted to contribute, my comments were either ignored or quickly redirected back to more traditional topics. The physical separation became even more pronounced when Margaret brought out the main course. The adults received perfectly prepared filet mignon with roasted vegetables and red wine sauce, while Tommy and I got hamburgers and French fries. The message was unmistakable: real adults deserve real food while children get children's meals. Margaret had spent considerable time and money creating an elegant anniversary dinner, but she had deliberately excluded me from participating as an equal family member. Every detail reinforced the message that marriage and conventional success were the only acceptable paths to adulthood. The climactic moment came when dessert was being planned. Margaret stood up with obvious excitement and cleared her throat for an important announcement. Robert and I have made a significant decision about our future. She began looking directly at David and Sarah. We've decided to sell the lake house that's been in our family for 3 generations. Since our responsible children deserve to inherit something meaningful, we're planning to divide the proceeds between David and Sarah. She paused dramatically before delivering the final blow. Of course, Paul wouldn't know what to do with property anyway, so this arrangement works perfectly for everyone. The room fell silent except for the sound of Tommy's innocent chewing. My siblings exchanged excited glances, already calculating their windfall, while I sat frozen in my plastic chair, processing the magnitude of what had just been announced. I excused myself from the kids' table, claiming I needed fresh air. My hands were trembling slightly as I stepped onto the back porch, but not from the cool evening breeze. The weight of my family's dismissal had finally reached a breaking point, and I needed to process what was really happening here. Instead of taking a walk, I pulled out my phone and started making calls. The first was to Marcus Rivera, my business attorney, who answered despite the late hour. "Marcus, I need you to research something immediately," I said quietly. Walking to the far corner of the yard where my voice wouldn't carry, look into any property listings for a lake house owned by Robert and Margaret Anderson in Millfield County. I need to know about buyers' contracts and timeline. While Marcus worked his connections, I called Janet Chen, my accountant and financial advisor. Janet, hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to make a competitive cash offer on lakefront property, how quickly could we move? For you, Paul, we could have funds transferred and paperwork ready within hours if necessary. How much are we talking about? Potentially several $100,000, maybe more. I'll know soon. I hung up and stood in my parents' backyard looking at the house where I'd grown up. From outside, I could hear laughter and animated conversation continuing at the adult table. Nobody had noticed my absence, which somehow didn't surprise me. Let me explain something I've never told my family. My consulting business isn't just successful, it's extraordinarily profitable. I specialize in cybersecurity for major corporations, and my client list includes household names that pay premium rates for discretion and expertise. I live modestly by choice, not necessity, and my bank account reflects years of careful investing and high-end consulting fees. I own a penthouse downtown, a portfolio of rental properties, and enough liquid assets to make most people's heads spin. But I've never corrected my family's assumptions, because I wanted to see if they could love and respect me without knowing about my wealth. Tonight's humiliation proved they couldn't. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Found the listing, lake house under contract with Clearwater Development Corp, closing scheduled for tomorrow morning. They're paying $450,000 cash. I immediately called him back. What kind of company is Clearwater Development? They specialize in tearing down historic properties and building luxury condominiums, not exactly preservation-minded. A cold fury settled in my stomach. My grandfather had built that lake house with his own hands in 1948. He'd specifically told me during his final days that he hoped it would stay in our family forever. He'd shown me every handcrafted detail, every carefully chosen piece of wood, every family memory embedded in those walls. I returned to the house through the kitchen, where I could overhear continued conversation about the lake house sale. David was explaining his plans to use his portion for his children's college funds, while Sarah mentioned paying off their mortgage early. They spoke about the property as if it were just a financial asset, not 3 generations of family history. I rejoined Tommy at our little table, but my nephew sensed something had changed. "Uncle Paul, you look sad. Are you okay?" "I'm thinking about some grown-up stuff, buddy." Sometimes families make decisions that affect everyone, even when not everyone gets to participate. Tommy nodded solemnly. "Like when mom and dad decide we're moving and I don't get to vote." Exactly like that. As I sat there watching my family celebrate their impending inheritance while completely excluding me, I made several more discreet phone calls. The picture that emerged was deeply disturbing. Marcus had discovered that my parents weren't selling the lake house to provide inheritance for their children. They were selling because they desperately needed money. Robert's small accounting firm had been struggling for months, and they'd accumulated significant debts they were hiding from everyone. But the most shocking revelation came when I overheard my father taking a phone call in his study. I'd gotten up to use the bathroom when I heard him talking in hushed, stressed tones. "I understand the payment is overdue," Robert was saying. "The house sale will go through tomorrow, and we'll have your money by the end of the week. $60,000 just like we agreed." My blood ran cold. $60,000 wasn't just any debt. That was medical debt. I remembered my mother's frequent doctor appointments over the past year, appointments she'd claimed were just routine checkups. The pieces suddenly clicked together with devastating clarity. Margaret had been fighting cancer, and they'd been hiding both the diagnosis and the crushing medical bills from their entire family. They weren't selling the lake house to reward their successful children. They were selling it to survive financially, and they were too proud to ask for help. I returned to the kids' table with my mind reeling. My parents were facing a medical and financial crisis. My siblings were unknowingly celebrating what they thought was their inheritance, and our family's most precious legacy was about to be destroyed by developers. Meanwhile, I sat at a plastic table being treated like a child, despite having more than enough resources to solve every problem. The irony was almost too painful to bear. While my family dismissed me as unsuccessful and irresponsible, I was actually the only one with the financial capability to preserve our grandfather's lake house and help my parents through their crisis. But they'd never even considered asking for my help because they assumed I had nothing to offer. Tommy looked up from his hamburger. "Uncle Paul, my dad, says you don't have a real job, but you always seem really smart when you talk about computers and stuff. Why don't grown-ups listen to you?" His question struck right to the heart of the problem. My family had decided who I was based on their limited understanding, and they'd never bothered to look deeper. Tonight's humiliation wasn't just about seating arrangements. It was about years of assumptions, dismissal, and exclusion that had finally reached a breaking point. As I watched my parents and siblings continue their celebration completely unaware of the real situation they were facing, I realized something had to change. But the solution wouldn't come from explaining or defending myself. It would come from action, and I was finally ready to take it. Sitting at that ridiculous kids' table surrounded by superhero placemats and plastic cutlery, I found myself reflecting on 32 years of family dynamics that had led to this moment. This wasn't just about tonight's humiliation. It was the culmination of decades of being overlooked, underestimated, and excluded from meaningful family decisions. I remembered my college graduation from MIT with honors in computer science. While I was walking across the stage to receive my degree, my parents were attending David's work promotion party. When I called to share my achievement, my mother's response was, "That's wonderful, dear. David just got promoted to assistant manager." We're so proud of how well he's doing. My accomplishments were always footnotes to my siblings' more conventional successes. When I started my consulting business, my parents warned me about the instability of self-employment. When I bought my first investment property, they suggested I was being financially reckless. When I donated anonymously to local charities, they never knew because I didn't seek recognition. The pattern was clear marriage and traditional employment were the only measures of success my family recognized. Everything else was dismissed as temporary, unstable, or immature. As I watched the adult table's animated conversation, I realized how thoroughly I'd been written out of our family narrative. They discussed holiday plans without consulting me, made major decisions without my input, and celebrated milestones without acknowledging my presence. David was describing his latest achievement, securing a major commercial loan for a local business. The client specifically requested me because of my reputation for reliability, he said proudly. It's the largest deal our branch has closed this year. Everyone congratulated him enthusiastically. Jessica added details about the bonus he'd receive and how they plan to use it for a family vacation to Disney World. Sarah followed with her own professional triumph. The principal nominated me for the State Teacher Excellence Award, she announced. If I win, it comes with a $5,000 grant for classroom supplies. Again, the table erupted in praise and support. Brian talked about how proud he was of his wife's dedication to education, and my parents beamed with obvious satisfaction at their daughter's recognition. When conversation briefly turned toward me, I mentioned that one of my cybersecurity solutions had prevented a major data breach for a Fortune 100 company, potentially saving them millions in damages and regulatory fines. The response was polite but hollow. That sounds interesting, Paul, Margaret said while clearing plates. Maybe someday you'll find work with a real company instead of just consulting. Consulting is fine for young people, Robert added, but eventually you need stability and benefits. David could probably help you find something permanent at the bank. Their well-intentioned dismissal stung more than outright hostility would have. They genuinely believed they were offering helpful advice, completely unaware that my consulting fees exceeded David's annual salary by a substantial margin. I glanced at Tommy, who was listening to the adult conversation with the Absorption Children show, when they sense underlying tensions they don't understand. His innocent presence at our shared table somehow made the situation more poignant. He was here because he was 8 years old. I was here because my family considered me equally childish. The conversation shifted to family traditions and upcoming holidays. Without consulting me, they began making plans that assumed my availability, while simultaneously excluding me from decision-making. For Thanksgiving, we should book that cruise we discussed, Margaret suggested. We'll need 4 rooms, one for David and Jessica and the kids, one for Sarah and Brian and their daughter, one for Robert and me, and Tommy can share with his parents. What about Uncle Paul? Tommy asked innocently. An awkward pause followed. Well, Paul can decide if he wants to join us, David said dismissively. Though cruise ships might be expensive for someone with irregular income. They were planning a family vacation while simultaneously suggesting I couldn't afford it. The casual cruelty was breathtaking. Actually, Ben, I said quietly, I'd be happy to contribute to the trip costs if money's a concern. Robert laughed. That's generous, son, but let the adults handle the financial planning. You focus on getting your career established. I was 32 years old, held multiple advanced degrees, owned a multi-million-dollar business, and had more investment experience than my entire family combined. Yet they spoke to me like an unemployed teenager offering to chip in his allowance money. The evening's most painful moment came during dessert preparation. Margaret brought out a beautiful anniversary cake she'd ordered from an upscale bakery. As she cut generous slices for the adult table, she handed Tommy and me significantly smaller pieces. Children don't need as much sugar, she explained cheerfully. The symbolism was inescapable. Even dessert portions reinforced their message about my status in the family hierarchy. As I ate my reduced slice of cake with a plastic fork, I listened to my siblings discuss their future plans with obvious excitement. David talked about expanding their house to add a home office, while Sarah mentioned Brian's opportunity to partner in a larger construction company. Their dreams were achievable and realistic, but they required the financial foundation they expected from the lake house sale. They had no idea their inheritance was actually their parents' desperate attempt to pay medical bills, and they had no concept that their dismissed brother could solve everyone's problems without straining his budget. The climactic revelation came when I overheard my father on another phone call. This time, he was talking to someone from the bank about accelerating the closing process. "We need the funds as soon as possible," Robert said urgently. "The medical payment is due by Friday, and if we miss it, they're threatening collection action." My heart sank as the full picture crystallized. Tomorrow wasn't just about selling the lake house. It was about my parents' financial survival. The development company wasn't just buying property, they were purchasing 3 generations of family history because my parents were too proud to admit they needed help. But the most devastating realization was yet to come. As I sat at my plastic table listening to my family celebrate what they thought was their good fortune, I understood that tomorrow was also the anniversary of my grandfather's death. 20 years ago, he'd passed away while sitting on the lake house porch watching the sunset over water he'd loved his entire life. My family had forgotten this detail in their excitement about the sale. They were planning to sign away grandfather's legacy on the exact anniversary of his passing, and none of them had remembered the significance of the date. That's when I knew what I had to do. The weight of everything I'd discovered settled over me like a suffocating blanket. My parents were hiding a medical crisis while facing financial ruin. My siblings were unknowingly celebrating the destruction of our family's most precious legacy. And I was sitting at a kid's table, dismissed as irrelevant by the very people I had the power to help. I stood up from the plastic chair, my decision crystallizing with perfect clarity. I wouldn't argue, plead, or try to explain myself. I wouldn't reveal my true financial situation or attempt to negotiate for respect. I would simply remove myself from a situation where my dignity was under constant assault. Walking toward the kitchen where my parents were preparing coffee service, I asked for a private word. Margaret wiped her hands on her apron while Robert continued arranging cups on a silver tray. "Mom, Dad, I need to discuss something important with you." They looked mildly annoyed at the interruption, but followed me to the butler's pantry where we could speak privately. "I couldn't help but notice you're facing some financial challenges." I began carefully. "I'd like to help with whatever you need. Medical bills, debt payments, whatever's causing stress." Margaret's face immediately flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Paul Anderson, I don't know what you think you overheard, but our financial situation is none of your business." "We don't have money problems," Robert added defensively. "And even if we did, you're hardly in a position to offer assistance. You need to focus on getting your own life stabilized before worrying about others." Their response was exactly what I'd expected, but it still stung. Even in crisis, they couldn't consider that their dismissed son might have something valuable to offer. "I understand you're selling the lake house," I continued. "I was hoping you might reconsider. Grandfather always wanted it to stay in the family." Margaret's expression hardened. "Your grandfather is gone, Paul. We have to make practical decisions based on current reality, not sentimental memories." "Besides," Robert interjected, "property ownership is a serious responsibility. It requires maturity and financial stability that comes with real career success." Their message was unmistakable. I wasn't adult enough to understand important decisions or capable enough to contribute meaningfully to family solutions. I nodded quietly and returned to the dining room where my siblings were discussing how they planned to invest their inheritance portions. David explained his strategy of diversifying between his children's college funds and long-term stock investments, while Sarah talked about paying off debts and establishing an emergency fund. They spoke with the confidence of people who'd received financial windfalls, completely unaware they were actually benefiting from their parents' medical crisis. Their excitement about money they'd never earned felt obscene given the real circumstances. When I suggested they might want to reconsider the sale, their reaction was swift and dismissive. David laughed condescendingly. "Paul, you wouldn't understand real estate decisions because you've never owned property. This is exactly the kind of thing adults need to handle." "Some responsibilities are too important for kids to worry about," Sarah added with obvious superiority. "Maybe when you've built some actual equity and financial stability, you'll understand these choices better." Their casual cruelty finally broke something inside me. I'd spent 32 years trying to earn their respect through achievements they couldn't recognize. I'd built a successful business, accumulated substantial wealth, and contributed positively to my community, but none of that mattered because I didn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable adulthood. I walked back to the kids' table where Tommy was finishing his small slice of cake. "Are you leaving, Uncle Paul?" he asked, noticing me pick up my jacket. I knelt down to his eye level, seeing genuine concern in his young face. "Yes, buddy, I am." "But what about dessert and presents and stuff?" "Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions about where they belong," I explained gently. "But I want you to remember something very important. Being kind to people matters more than following rules about who sits where or who gets to make decisions. Always treat people with respect even when other adults forget to do that." Tommy hugged me tightly. "I think you're pretty grown up, Uncle Paul. I don't understand why they make you sit with me." "Maybe because you're the best company at this party," I said, ruffling his hair. "Take care of yourself and remember what I told you about being kind." I stood up and walked toward the front door, retrieving my car keys from the entry table. The adult conversation continued without interruption. Discussions of mortgage rates, investment strategies, and vacation plans flowing seamlessly despite my movement through the room. Nobody noticed I was leaving. My parents were busy arranging coffee service, my siblings were deep in financial planning discussions, and the spouses were comparing notes about their children's activities. My absence didn't register as significant enough to warrant attention. I reached the front door and paused for a moment, looking back at the warm lights and animated conversations. This was my family, the people who should love and support me unconditionally, but they'd made it clear that love was conditional on conforming to their expectations. As I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, I heard Tommy's voice calling from the dining room. "Where did Uncle Paul go?" He said goodbye, but nobody listened. I walked to my car in the driveway, started the engine, and drove away from my childhood home. In my rearview mirror, I could see the golden light spilling from the dining room windows, where my family continued their celebration, completely unaware that they just lost a family member through their own actions. The irony wasn't lost on me. While they celebrated their anticipated inheritance, I was already planning to use my actual wealth to preserve the family legacy they were about to destroy. While they dismissed my capabilities, I was preparing to solve problems they couldn't even acknowledge existed. But first I had work to do. I drove through the quiet suburban streets toward downtown, my mind completely focused on the task ahead. While my family continued their anniversary celebration in blissful ignorance, I had roughly 8 hours to prevent the destruction of our grandfather's legacy and potentially save my parents from financial ruin. My destination was the 42nd floor of the Commerce Tower, where my cybersecurity firm occupied 3 full floors of premium office space. Most people assumed I worked from a cramped apartment or shared co-working space, but Anderson Security Solutions was actually one of the region's most successful consulting firms. I'd built the business from nothing after graduation, starting with small contracts and gradually earning the trust of major corporations. My specialty was preventing cyber attacks before they happened, and companies paid premium rates for that kind of protection. My client list included Fortune 50 companies, government agencies, and financial institutions that valued discretion above all else. The building's night security guard Carlos greeted me with surprise. "Working late again, Mr. Anderson? You should get some rest on weekends." "Big project deadline," I replied, which wasn't entirely untrue. My executive office overlooked the city skyline with floor-to-ceiling windows and elegant furnishings that reflected the success my family couldn't imagine. I'd worked hard for every detail: the handcrafted mahogany desk, the leather seating area, the wall displays showcasing industry awards and recognition letters from satisfied clients. I settled behind my desk and immediately called Marcus Rivera, my attorney. Despite the late hour, he answered on the second ring. "Marcus, I need you to execute a property acquisition tonight. Full cash offer, no contingencies, and I need to close before 9 a.m. tomorrow." "That's ambitious even for you. What's the target?" I provided him with the lake house details and explained the timeline constraints. "The current owners are selling to Clearwater Development for $450,000. I want to offer $600,000 cash with immediate closing. $600,000 that's significantly above market value. It's worth more than money to me. Can you make it happen?" "For that price difference, absolutely. I'll contact their realtor immediately and start preparing paperwork. You want this under a shell corporation for privacy? Perfect. And Marcus include a clause allowing the current owners to remain as caretakers if they choose. Full maintenance provided, no rental payments required." While Marcus worked his legal connections, I called Janet Chen, my financial advisor and accountant. "Janet, I need $600,000 in liquid funds available for immediate transfer. Wire transfer, cashier's check, whatever works fastest." "Not a problem. Your money market account can cover that easily." "Should I ask what this is for?" "Family preservation," I said simply. Next, I contacted Richard Hayes, a private investigator I'd used for corporate security consulting. "Richard, I need a complete financial background check on Robert and Margaret Anderson. I need to know about debts, medical expenses, payment schedules, everything. How quickly do you need this?" "Before morning." "Consider it done." By midnight, the pieces were falling into place. Marcus called with confirmation that my offer had been accepted immediately. The development company, faced with losing a profitable deal, had withdrawn their contract without argument. We'd closed on the property using an overnight wire transfer and expedited legal processes that only substantial cash offers could make possible. Richard's investigation revealed the full scope of my parents' financial crisis. Margaret's cancer treatment had cost over $80,000 after insurance, and they'd been making minimum payments on medical credit cards with devastating interest rates. Robert's accounting firm was hemorrhaging clients, and they'd borrowed against their house to cover operating expenses. They weren't just selling the lake house for inheritance money. They were selling it to avoid bankruptcy and potential foreclosure on their primary residence. Meanwhile, back at the anniversary dinner, my absence was finally being noticed. Margaret had called everyone to the living room for gift opening when Tommy asked again where I'd gone. This time his question couldn't be dismissed with vague explanations. "Paul stepped out for some air," David said dismissively. "He'll be back." But when they called my name for gift presentation, silence filled the room. A search of the house confirmed what Tommy had been trying to tell them. I was gone. "He probably went home early," Sarah suggested. "You know how he gets overwhelmed at family gatherings." Margaret tried calling my phone, but I was too busy coordinating legal and financial details to answer. Her first voicemail was mildly annoyed. "Paul, where did you go?" "We're opening gifts and you're missing everything." The second call an hour later carried more concern. "Honey, please call back. We're worried about you." By the third call, panic was setting in. "Paul, this isn't like you. Please let us know you're safe." David, feeling responsible as the older brother, decided to drive to what he thought was my apartment. He'd never actually visited, but assumed I lived in a modest rental somewhere affordable. Using the address for my emergency contact information, he drove to Harbor View Towers, one of the city's most exclusive residential buildings. When he gave my name to the concierge, he was directed to the penthouse level. The revelation that his unsuccessful little brother lived in a luxury penthouse worth more than his suburban house was the first crack in David's understanding of reality. While David stood in shocked silence in my building's marble lobby, Sarah had started researching my business online. What she found contradicted everything they believed about my professional situation. Anderson Security Solutions had an impressive corporate website showcasing major client testimonials, industry certifications, and professional recognition. News articles mentioned my company's role in preventing significant cyber attacks, and business journals had featured my innovative security protocols. "This can't be the same Paul," she told Brian. "This company looks incredibly successful." But the photos on the website were unmistakable. Their dismissed little brother was actually the founder and CEO of a multi-million-dollar cybersecurity firm. Back at the house, Robert was experiencing chest pains from stress over the failed lake house sale. The buyer had called that evening to explain that a competing offer had forced them to withdraw, leaving Robert and Margaret without the funds they desperately needed for their medical debt payments. Margaret called me repeatedly, leaving increasingly frantic messages as the evening progressed. Her final voicemail, left at 2 a.m., was filled with tears and desperation. "Paul, please call back. Something terrible has happened with the house sale, and I don't know what to do. We need to talk to you about something important, something we should have discussed long ago. Please come home." But I wasn't coming home. I was busy ensuring that my grandfather's lake house would remain in our family forever, while simultaneously preparing to help my parents through their crisis, whether they wanted my help or not. By 3 a.m., I owned the property they'd tried to sell, had established a financial plan to resolve their debts, and was drafting a proposal that would force my family to acknowledge who I really was and what I was capable of achieving. The boy they'd relegated to the kids' table was about to demonstrate exactly how grown up he'd become. Dawn was breaking over the city as my phone finally buzzed with a call from Robert's realtor, Christine Walsh. Her voice carried barely controlled panic as she delivered news that would devastate my parents. "Mr. Anderson, I'm calling with an update about your parents' property sale. The deal with Clearwater Development fell through last night due to a competing cash offer. The new buyer closed immediately with a $600,000 bid." She paused, clearly struggling with how to explain the situation. "I know your parents were counting on those proceeds for immediate financial needs. The anonymous buyer's offer was simply too strong to ignore." What Christine didn't know was that she was speaking to the anonymous buyer and that I'd orchestrated the entire transaction to save my family's legacy while they slept. After hanging up, I spent the early morning hours finalizing my strategy. Richard's investigation had provided a complete picture of my parents' financial crisis, and I'd developed a comprehensive solution that would address their medical debts, business struggles, and long-term security. But more importantly, I'd crafted a plan that would force my family to confront their assumptions about me and acknowledge the reality of who I'd become. At 8:30 a.m., my assistant Jennifer called each family member with the same message: "Mr. Paul Anderson requests your presence at his office this morning to discuss an urgent family matter. Please arrive at Anderson Security Solutions Commerce Tower, 42nd floor, at 10 a.m. sharp." The responses were predictably varied. David was still reeling from his discovery of my penthouse apartment. Sarah was confused by my company's impressive online presence. My parents were desperate for any solution to their financial crisis. Meanwhile, back at their house, the full impact of the failed sale was becoming clear. Robert had spent the morning on the phone with medical billing companies, trying to negotiate payment extensions they weren't willing to provide. Margaret sat at their kitchen table, surrounded by bills, finally forced to confront the mathematical reality of their situation. "We're going to lose the house," she whispered to Robert. "Without the lake house money, we can't make the medical payments, and they're threatening legal action." Robert's chest pains had worsened, overnight stress manifesting as physical symptoms that frightened them both. At 68, he couldn't afford a heart attack on top of everything else they were facing. David arrived at my office building first, still processing what he'd discovered about my living situation. The Commerce Tower's impressive lobby with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers reinforced the growing realization that he'd completely misjudged his little brother's circumstances. When the elevator opened on the 42nd floor, he was greeted by Jennifer, my executive assistant, who directed him to a conference room with panoramic city views. The Anderson Security Solutions logo was prominently displayed on glass walls, along with framed certificates and industry awards. Sarah and Brian arrived next, having spent the morning researching my company more thoroughly. They'd found news articles about major cybersecurity contracts, testimonials from Fortune 500 companies, and professional recognition that contradicted everything they thought they knew about my career. "This doesn't make sense," Sarah whispered to Brian as they took seats in the elegant conference room. "How could we not know about any of this?" My parents were the last to arrive, looking haggard and desperate after their sleepless night of financial panic. Margaret's eyes were red from crying, and Robert moved carefully, favoring his left arm in a way that suggested his chest pains were worsening. When they were all seated around my conference table, I entered wearing a perfectly tailored business suit and carrying a leather portfolio. The transformation from last night's dismissed family member to this morning's corporate executive was unmistakable. I took my seat at the head of the table, the same position grandfather had occupied at family meals before his death. The symbolism wasn't accidental. "Thank you all for coming," I began formally. "We need to discuss several family matters that require immediate attention." The silence that followed was profound. My family members looked around the impressive office space, processing the disconnect between their assumptions and the reality surrounding them. "First," I continued, "I want to address the lake house situation. I'm aware that your sale to the development company fell through due to a competing offer." Robert's face crumpled with defeat. "Paul, we don't know what we're going to do. We needed that money for important obligations." "I understand completely." Which brings me to my second point. I know about Margaret's cancer treatment and the medical debts you've been hiding from everyone. Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "How could you possibly know about that?" "Because unlike the rest of this family, I make it my business to understand important situations before they become crises." I opened my portfolio and removed several documents. "I also know about the business difficulties, the mounting debts, and the fact that you're facing potential foreclosure on this house." David leaned forward, confusion evident in his voice. "Paul, how do you know all this? And what is this place? This can't really be your company." I smiled calmly. "Anderson Security Solutions is my company. I founded it 8 years ago, and we now handle cybersecurity for some of the largest corporations in the country. Last year's revenue was just over $12 million. The number hit the room like a physical blow. Sarah made a small choking sound while David's face went completely pale. "But you're not married," Margaret whispered, as if that somehow negated everything else. "Marriage and business success are not synonymous, as my company's financial records clearly demonstrate." I stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. Which brings us to the solutions I'm proposing for our current family challenges. The climactic revelation came when I turned back to face them with my final announcement. "I'm the anonymous buyer who purchased grandfather's lake house. I now own the property you were trying to sell, and I've preserved it exactly as grandfather intended, as a permanent family legacy." The room erupted in shocked exclamations and stunned silence. Robert actually stood up from his chair, swaying slightly as the full implications hit him. "You bought our house with what money? How is this possible?" "With my money from my successful business, using my financial resources that you've spent years dismissing as inadequate." Margaret began crying, overwhelmed by the collision of relief and embarrassment. "Paul, we had no idea. We never imagined you were doing so well." "You never bothered to ask," I replied simply. "And now we need to discuss exactly how we're going to move forward from here." I returned to my seat at the head of the conference table, allowing my family time to process the magnitude of what they just learned. The silence stretched uncomfortably as each person grappled with their own misconceptions and the reality now confronting them. David was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Paul, I drove to what I thought was your apartment last night. That penthouse. You actually live there." "I do. I've lived there for 4 years, but none of you ever asked to visit or showed interest in my living situation." Sarah's face was flushed with embarrassment. "We researched your company this morning. All those awards, those major clients. Why didn't you ever tell us about your success?" I leaned back in my leather chair, maintaining my professional composure. I wanted to see if my family could love and respect me without knowing about my wealth. Last night's humiliation provided a definitive answer to that question. Margaret was still crying softly, dabbing her eyes with tissues Jennifer had discreetly provided. "Paul, we never meant to hurt you. We thought we were encouraging you to build stability. By seating me at a kid's table with cartoon placemats while discussing important family decisions without my input." Robert, who had been silent during this exchange, finally found his voice. "Son, we made terrible mistakes. But what you've accomplished? We're proud of you. We just didn't understand." Understanding comes from asking questions and showing genuine interest in someone's life. You've had 32 years to demonstrate that curiosity. I opened my portfolio and removed a comprehensive document I'd spent the morning preparing. However, I'm not here to relitigate past grievances. I'm here to propose solutions for our family's current challenges. I slid copies of the proposal across the table. First, regarding the medical debts. I'm prepared to pay the entire $80,000 balance immediately with no expectation of repayment. Margaret gasped. "Paul, we can't accept that kind of charity from you." "It's not charity, it's family support, something you've been too proud to request, but which I'm capable of providing." I turned to address Robert specifically. "Second, regarding your business difficulties, I propose contracting Anderson Security Solutions to handle your firm's cybersecurity needs, along with referring several of my clients who require accounting services. This should stabilize your revenue and provide growth opportunities." Robert's expression shifted from shock to cautious hope. "You would trust us with your business clients." "I would trust competent professionals with appropriate qualifications. Your firm has an excellent reputation for accuracy and integrity." I moved to the next section of my proposal. "David, I'm offering to transfer our corporate banking to your branch, including payroll management investment accounts and commercial lending. This represents approximately $2 million in annual banking volume." David's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. The commission potential from that kind of commercial relationship would significantly boost his career trajectory and earning potential. "Sarah, I want to fund the reading program you've mentioned wanting to start at your school. $50,000 should provide books, technology, and supplies for students who need additional literacy support." Sarah began crying, overwhelmed by the unexpected opportunity to pursue her educational passion project. "But," I continued firmly, "these offers come with specific conditions that are non-negotiable." The room's atmosphere shifted as everyone realized this wasn't just a generous rescue, but a restructuring of family dynamics. "First, I require genuine respect for my lifestyle choices and career path. I don't need your approval of my unmarried status, but I demand acknowledgement that success comes in many forms." I made eye contact with each family member before continuing. "Second, I want full inclusion in family decisions that affect our shared interests. No more planning around me or assuming my availability without consultation. Third, Tommy never sits at a kid's table again at family gatherings. Children deserve dignity and inclusion in age-appropriate ways, just as adults deserve respect regardless of their personal circumstances." Margaret nodded eagerly. "Of course, Paul. Anything you want. We'll change everything." "I don't want everything changed. I want basic human decency and family respect, which shouldn't require wealth to earn." I stood and walked to a wall display showcasing photographs from various family events over the years. In most of them, I was either absent or positioned at the edge of group photos, a visual metaphor for my family role. The lake house will be deeded to a family trust, ensuring it remains our legacy forever. You're welcome to use it whenever you choose, and I'll handle all maintenance and expenses. I returned to my seat for the final element of my proposal. However, I want one more thing. I want a family dinner at the lake house next weekend, where we discuss how we communicate with each other and why assumptions can be more damaging than honest questions. Robert cleared his throat nervously. Paul, we owe you more than just an apology. We owe you recognition for who you've become despite our failure to see it. Recognition is earned through sustained behavior change, not dramatic pronouncements. I'm willing to rebuild our relationships if everyone commits to treating each other with genuine respect. Margaret wiped her eyes and looked directly at me. I've been fighting cancer for 8 months, and I was terrified of being a burden to anyone. But watching you take charge of problems we couldn't solve, I realize we raised a remarkable man who somehow succeeded despite our narrow thinking. David spoke up hesitantly. Paul, I've spent years thinking I was the successful brother because I followed conventional paths. But you built something extraordinary while I was judging you for being different. Sarah added her own confession. I dismissed your career because I didn't understand technology, but you've been protecting companies and creating jobs while I was assuming you were unsuccessful. The conversation continued for another hour as we worked through specific implementation details and relationship boundaries. By the end of our meeting, we'd established a framework for moving forward that respected everyone's dignity while acknowledging the changes needed. As my family prepared to leave, Tommy peeked around the conference room door. David and Jessica had brought him along, unsure what they'd encounter at this mysterious office meeting. Uncle Paul, this place is really cool. Are you like a super important business guy? I knelt down to his level, remembering his innocent support during last night's humiliation. I run a company that helps protect people's computer information, buddy. But the most important thing is that we're family, and families should take care of each other. Does this mean you don't have to sit at the little table anymore? It means everyone in our family gets to sit wherever they belong, and we all belong together. 3 weeks later, our family gathered at the lake house for the first of what would become regular monthly dinners. The conversation flowed naturally between topics that included everyone's interests and perspectives. Tommy sat between his parents at the main table, participating in discussions appropriate for his age. My parents had completed Margaret's cancer treatment, using the best specialists available with all medical expenses handled discreetly through my financial assistance. Robert's accounting firm had gained 3 major new clients through my referrals, stabilizing their business and providing growth opportunities. David's banking relationship with my company had earned him recognition as a top commercial lender with promotion opportunities, emerging from his demonstrated ability to manage complex business accounts. Sarah's reading program had launched successfully, providing literacy support for 30 students while serving as a model for other schools interested in similar initiatives. Most importantly, our family had learned that love and respect shouldn't be conditional on conventional achievements or traditional life choices. Success comes in many forms, and families grow stronger when they celebrate differences rather than enforcing conformity. As we finished dinner that evening, I found myself sitting on the same dock where my grandfather used to fish every sunset. Tommy joined me, bringing his new fishing rod and endless questions about business, family, and life. Uncle Paul, why do grown-ups sometimes forget to be nice to each other? Sometimes people make assumptions about others without taking time to really know them. The best families remember that everyone has value even when their choices look different from what we expect. I'm going to remember that when I grow up. I think you will, buddy. I think you'll be the kind of person who treats everyone with respect no matter what. As the sun set over the water my grandfather had loved, I realized that preserving family legacy wasn't just about saving buildings or maintaining traditions. It was about creating relationships built on understanding acceptance and genuine care for each other's well-being and happiness. The lake house would stand for future generations, but more importantly, our family had learned to stand together with mutual respect and authentic love. Have you ever been in a situation where your family underestimated your capabilities or dismissed your achievements? How did you handle feeling overlooked or misunderstood by the people closest to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your experiences with family dynamics and finding your voice in difficult situations. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video to help others find it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming family challenges and building stronger relationships. And don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear about the importance of treating family members with respect and dignity, regardless of their life choices. Thank you for listening to this story about family respect and the courage to stand up for your worth. Remember that your value doesn't depend on others' recognition, but healthy relationships do require mutual respect and genuine care. Take care of yourselves and the people you love, and I'll see you in the next story